Okay, the NRL has announced record revenues from 2024 at 744 million Australian dollars. And of course, a large portion of that has come through the Vegas games, although the year before was also record revenues, and in part that was driven by the end of season internationals, the Pacific Challenge. Now, add Vegas games and the Pacific Challenge internationals together, and you're going to make a lot more money. Yes, $300 million came from the Vegas games through the gambling investment and sponsorship, and we can argue the pros and cons of that. We can, to death. There's money coming in, which is beneficial to the sport as a whole, for the players, the clubs, the fans, the infrastructure and the grassroots, and the league itself. And there's the cons, where obviously gambling is a very divisive issue, and not everyone's in favour of the gambling sponsorship and how the gambling ads are done and the amount of and the negative connotations. But it's a massive financial injection into the game. Projections are that the league could top $1 billion by the end of this current TV deal in revenue earned by the end of 2026 season, because from 2027 onwards a new TV will have to be negotiated. Potentially a new CBA as well between the RLPA and the NRL. Now the RLPA has obviously argued for a CBA for the women as well. The NRL has stated it wants the women's game to become fully professional and have a 20-team league by the end of the decade. So that's 2030. Right? They want the women's game to be of a decent enough standard where all the players can be on professional contracts, and they want a 20-team league. We know what the 18th team is going to be. It's going to be based in PNG. But here's the thing. The next TV rights and media rights negotiation, I think, is going to go more in the favour of the NRL for what they want to charge for those rights, because they're making record revenues year on year. And this year is just ridiculous with the revenues they've made, which is also a good sign with crowd numbers. Look at the Warriors in Auckland, for example. They sold out every single home game, the first team ever to do that. Now, they missed the finals, but they sold out every game. And that is a healthy sign that a team outside the top 8 is selling out. That is a healthy sign. Crowd numbers were up. The TV viewership, domestically in Australia, New Zealand, and overseas of the Vegas games was higher than expected. Lower in the US than they wanted, but we've discussed the reasons for that, but higher than actually expected. It got people talking. Now, not everyone is in favour of taking games to Vegas. It was never going to happen that everyone was going to agree on it. Most people were disappointed that their team wasn't selected to be one of the teams going to Vegas last year. It's the same this year. There were fans going, well, why is my team not going? Eventually, every team will play a game in Vegas. Now, at the same time, there's talk that the NRL may put the grand final up for tender, as in it will rotate between Sydney, Brisbane, Canberra, Adelaide, Perth, wherever the stadium is, they'll rotate it around rather than just keeping it in Sydney in the traditional location. And there'll be a bidding war for it. That's the potential. That's a talking point as well, which could add further revenue to the game. Now, whether that's doing the Super Bowl style grand final, that's interesting. That could be not the best idea. It could make them a lot of money, but it may not sit well with fans. We already have the neutral origin game on rotation around Australia, outside Queensland and New South Wales. And again, Origin is not getting the same TV viewership as it did in the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, and because people's media habits have changed. And this is where the media rights deal is going to be really interesting. Will Amazon and Netflix, for example, be also putting their hand up for the media rights negotiations to put a bid in? Because they've got money behind them. Amazon and Netflix have a lot of money behind them. And there is only a finite amount of cash in the world, and the sports media is no different to any other industry with there's a limit to funds. We have seen with media rights deals that linear TV has plateaued, hence why Amazon is now involved in streaming the Premier League, for example. So do not be surprised if streaming companies come on and want to get a piece of the NRL pie in regards to the TV rights negotiations. Now, what does this mean? The salary cap is going to go up at some point, and the RLPA are going to be very interesting with how they argue with the next CBA, how much revenue sharing the players get. The clubs are going to be key to this as well, as is the league. All the parties need to get round the table earlier than what they did with the last CBA, which nearly led to a player strike. The women's game as well is gaining traction. Now, we can argue the pros and cons. Is expansion being done sustainably enough? And are they growing the game at a steady pace? Are they growing too quickly or not quick enough? We can debate that. I think the NRLW is definitely a fun watch, but only one expansion team recently has made the top four. That was Cronulla. In their second season, they made the top four. Whereas the other teams that came in that expansion a couple of seasons ago haven't made the top four yet. So that's interesting. Increasing women's origin to 3 games from 1 also has added, again, extra revenue, and they broke records for attendance there. So attendance figures are climbing again. More fans in attendance means more ticket sales, and a proportion of those ticket sales go to the league. So ticket sales are behind it. That's merchandise sales, advertising revenue. And at a time when money's tight and there's a cost of living crisis, the fact they've announced record revenues is a real positive sign. How much profit they have left over after that, after all their expenses and outgoings, is going to be interesting. It's going to be significantly lower than 744 million. But it's going to be interesting how the revenues are distributed between the 17 clubs. It's going to be interesting to see, as I say, how much the salary cap goes up by in the coming years, next year and the year after, for example, with this media rights deal. So the salary cap is going to go up. It's going to be interesting by how much. And also minimum payments for players. The minimum salary, I think, is $100,000. How much will that ultimately go up by? Because we could potentially see more unrest between the RLPA and the league. Because the next CBA is going to be really interesting how they negotiate that. But overall, it's interesting they've announced record profits. And as I say, this puts the NRL in a stronger position in regards to the value they're going to put on the media rights deal when it comes to negotiation for the 2027 season and beyond. The concern is people are worried that they're not going to invest the money off the field correctly. Going into 2020, when the shutdown happened, the league basically was facing collapse. Half the league was facing going out of business. There was no assets. The only asset the NRL really had was their media arm, which was a self-defeating object because the money that goes into the NRL comes from the broadcasters, so they set up a rival broadcasting unit. That was their only tangible asset from the Todd Greenberg era. One of the reasons probably why he got the sack. Or resigned. I can't remember if he resigned or got the sack, but Todd Greenberg did not have his contract renewed. And so the NRL needs to invest this revenue wisely as well. Whatever's left over, they need to save some for a rainy day, which is what they failed to do in the lead up to 2020. They need to invest in some actual tangible assets that can be leveraged if they do need emergency loans in the future, if there's another pandemic or league shutdown. They need to have more investment in regards to the NRL having assets, investment in grassroots game, in the amateur game, and the regional game, grassroots, growing the game outside the traditional areas in Australia. So we're talking Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, Tasmania, Northern Territory, for example, and trying to at least build a player base that isn't all East Coast centric, because I think 95% of the players have played at some point in the East Coast at junior level. So they need to grow the game organically and make it healthy in places like Perth, in places, and try and grow it in the state of Victoria, because you've got the Melbourne Storm there. They need to try and grow the player base, the fan base, more than what they have. And there have been missteps along the way. So it's interesting, but there we go. It's going to be interesting what the future looks like. When will they break the $1 billion revenue barrier? It's going to be sooner rather than later on projections. And we can all agree to disagree on how Volandis and Abdo have run the game. Not everyone's going to agree with all the rule changes, as I say, some of the decisions taken. Not everyone agrees on the Vegas games, for example. But it's a talking point. And the fact the game is now making record revenues year on year is a healthy sign, considering 5 years ago the league basically nearly collapsed financially during COVID. So the turnaround under Volandis and Abdo, while not everyone agrees with all their decisions, financially it's paying off. And it's putting the league in a better financial position going forward. It's all a question about how they invest that money. Do they save some money for a rainy day? And also what the clubs, the players and the league get through revenue sharing, because that's going to be crucial as well for future investment. So there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts on the NRL and its record revenues from last year? And do you think they break the $1 billion barrier by the end of 2026, or will it become sooner? Will it come at the end of next year, the end of this year, or will it take until the new TV and media rights deal from 2027 onwards for that $1 billion barrier to be broken in regards to revenue? What happens to the salary cap? How much does it go up as a percentage? What happens to league minimum payments for players? How much will that go up? What happens to the women's game? A lot of questions to be answered. It's going to be interesting. But for me, for now, thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll have some more content for you guys very, very soon.